Hey, good afternoon. So it's always a key spot right after lunch when the sleepy enzymes sit in, so I'll try not to make this too dry. What I'm going to do is just quickly give you a little bit of context about who I am and my experience, so that you, sort of in the interest of full disclosure and to give some context. Then tell you a short actual story about particularly the impact of 3D printing and electronic transmission of products and how it's shaking up what we think we know about international trade law. And then take you through some high-level slides talking about some current issues that are really posed by 3D printing. And I hope what you'll take away from this is that what you think you know about trade today is possibly in 10 years going to be turned upside down and fairly obsolete. We have a legal system that was created in sort of 19th century terms, and a lot of what's going on now in the marketplace already is not fitting very well into that existing framework. So, but just by way of background, I'm a partner at a law firm in DC, at Ducey Mastriani Schomburg. We do Section 337 litigation at the International Trade Commission. 90% of my practice is cross-border IP litigation. Before that, I was at the International Trade Commission in the General Counsel's office, where my job was to review decisions that came up from the judges for the commission and then defend those decisions at the Federal Circuit. Before that, I noticed we had a lot of people from the Commerce Department here today. I worked in the General Counsel's office at the Commerce Department doing WTO and NAFTA litigation. And before that, I was in private practice at Hogan Lovells, a large law firm in DC, focusing on technical barriers to trade. So I'd like to start today by telling you a little bit about a case we were involved with on behalf of the Motion Picture Association and the Recording Industries Association, called Invisalign. And this was an ITC case that a year kind of came to a halt, more or less this year. It's a story that goes back 3 or 4 years, and here are the basic facts. It involves these dental molds. I don't know if any of you have worn these. They're these clear plastic things you stick in your mouth instead of having these metal braces. And by the nature of these products, they have to be customized for the user. So a few years ago, a competitor came into the marketplace, and what they did was, while the dental mold sat in the dental mold making machinery, if you will, sat in the dentist's office in the United States. In order to get a precise mold for your mouth, and also in order to, you have to have numerous molds to move the teeth along as they straighten. That required a detailed 3D print and detailed scans of the patient's mouth. This product of creating these files, they're called CAD files, which is basically a 3D representation of your jaw, there's a fair amount of work involved. It's a software application, but a programmer has to work with it. And in order to get costs down, I assume, the defendant in that case had outsourced the electronic work, the CAD file, the scan was sent abroad, and then the work was done in Pakistan. The electronic file then came back into the United States and was printed in the dentist's office. And so the plaintiff in that case, we call them a complainant at the ITC, brought suit under Section 337, which bars the importation and sale for importation in the United States of infringing articles. And the ITC took the case because on the theory that the data file, this CAD file that came across the border, was an article of commerce, and therefore within the jurisdiction of the International Trade Commission. And the commission found a violation and issued remedial orders. And the defendant appealed this up to the Federal Circuit. And the Federal Circuit and the ITC and the parties, and we intervened, I should add, on behalf of the motion picture folks and the recording industry, and you can imagine a lot of concerns about what would happen if no U.S. court had jurisdiction over electronic imports. So the Federal Circuit read the statute and said, an article of commerce, as defined in the U.S. trade law, cannot reach an electronic article. It cannot reach these CAD files, because that's not what Congress intended when it wrote this trade statute. And Section 337, I should add, was written in this earlier iterations, goes back to 1916. So it's been updated and amended over the years, most recently in the early 90s, and we argued that, well, clearly Congress understood by then that an article of commerce could be something electronic. Already then, there were issues about bootleg music and so on. Federal Circuit wasn't having any of it, and found no violation. And in a way, the case is most interesting because it shows the conceptual collision between our traditional concepts of what trade is and the regimes we've set up to deal with trade in articles, which still most of our trade regime, on the goods side, is directed to things you can touch, or products that embody things that you can touch. And services we think of as a very different issue. Don't think of it that way, but IP is straddling these boundaries, and now one incredible area of development in the economy that is not an abstraction, it's very real, and we're already seeing it in our practice, is 3D printing, which is really what this case was. It was the first big 3D printing case. So what I'd like to do now is just quickly take you at a high level through some of the 3D printing issues and to point out that there's so many areas of policy, governance, not just trade and IPR, that really can be turned on their heads by what's going on now in 3D printing. In some ways, I think of this, it seems to me we're in a moment that could be a little bit like the Gutenberg Bible moment, where all of a sudden the ability to get a printed book went from something that was unreachable for most people to something that an average apprentice with 2 or 3 weeks of work could afford to buy a book. And on the right there, you have an example of what I think could be considered the contemporary equivalent. This is an aircraft part. This is a bracket. It's an Airbus bracket. And in the old days, in order to make a bracket of this nature, you needed a big ingot, and you needed a foundry, and it was a big, heavy industrial plant to make. And when you made a print, you molded something like this, it was very difficult to make a mold that was optimal in terms of its strength, where it was strong. You had to overbuild it because there was no way. You were limited by the technology of molds. So necessarily, a mold was very heavy, and it had to have points of contact, right? So you could take the mold apart and have the product. So it's an incredible capital expenditure. You can only make it in one place. Well, with 3D printing, and now 3D printing, which I'll talk in a moment about what that really means, is not limited to plastics, stuff that you might see at Staples when they have their 3D printers. You can 3D print in titanium, you can 3D print food, you can 3D print cells. It's amazing what's already happened with this technology. So Airbus and many other manufacturers now printing on-demand brackets of this nature. You can see the design looks nothing like what you might have ever thought a bracket would look like. There's no resemblance to what a bracket looked like when it was made with a foundry mold. And drastic improvements in terms of efficiency and so on. And to take this up another level, by the way, which is just amazing if you think about what is really 3D printing about? These printers are standardized. What drives the printer? Software. And the software that drives these printers is already so complex that it's beyond the capacity of a programmer to design these components on their own. 3D printing software is now the leading edge of artificial intelligence. You have to teach the computer to think for itself, give it parameters, and then let the thing go. And many of these products are designed with many, many variables, strength, resilience, weight, in ways that actually we can't even do anymore individually. And it actually creates patentability problems because how exactly the computer came to this conclusion, we don't exactly know. So just quickly define terms for a little bit. What we call 3D printing is really additive manufacturing. And there are various variations on it, but it's essentially layers of material are added, layer after layer after layer, and it can be cured or hardened depending on the material involved, different ways, heat, lasers. And as I mentioned before, subtractive manufacturing is what old style working with metals is all about, because you are basically cutting away material. So from the question of energy, technique, it's Stone Age in comparison. It's not a entirely new technology, but it's, as with so many technologies, what matters is cost, and the cost per unit has just come down and down and down. And now it's becoming a very viable way of making commercial products. And as we'll discuss a little later, some of the applications are growing. Now, Gartner is a major marketing firm. They do market assessments, and the predictions is that even within 2 years, when you go to a store to buy many different products, you're not going to, and the shoes industry is a great example. There's work going on at all the major shoe makers now. Think about it. Why you would walk into a shoe store and stick on a standardized foot. Why would your foot fit in that thing? If you think about it, it doesn't make any sense. And you're trying very different brands and models and designs, putting in inserts to try to make this shoe fit you. But all that you'll need to do in 2 or 3 years is walk into the store, they will scan your foot, and you'll come back the next day, and the shoe will be made for you. And the cost of that shoe is not going to be any more expensive than what you're paying today, because there's no shipping. They don't have to have massive warehouses full of these shoes. They're just going to have your shoe. The only thing that they will need to maintain is raw materials. And this is not some future fantastic idea. It's around the corner. And already the first shoes are actually in production like this. But the cost is not going to be, from a consumer perspective, any higher. And by the way, the industry that is investing right now, some of the largest sums of money in this, is the food industry. Billions of dollars are going into research into 3D printing for food products. What that you would do at home, in commercial applications. So imagine, I wouldn't say you heard it here first, but I know many of you are familiar with this, but you really have to reimagine what it's even going to mean to go shopping. And when you need to go shopping. So, and this is where we start running into some IP concepts. I don't want to spend a lot of time on these specific ideas, but just to give you a quick overview of what this means, trademarks, right? So trademarks, the whole idea of trademark law is you have a product, a design, or a logo, or a phrase that has to have secondary meaning. You see something that's acquired secondary meaning. And so what we don't allow you to do is take somebody else's logo, symbol, or phrase that people say associate with Nike, like the Nike swoosh, and stick it on your shoe. Why? Because consumers think of a swoosh as a Nike product, and if you put it on your stuff, they're going to think of Nike. So you're appropriating the association. That's a commercial concept. What happens if you put the swoosh on a shoe that you wear, but you don't sell? There's no confusion. You're not selling it. You know exactly what you did. What does this mean for trademark law? Copyright, similarly, already you can go on, and many of you may have already seen this, to 3D print Superman, or to 3D print R2-D2. You just need to, there are scanners, you take the toy, somebody else's toy if you like, say from Mattel, you put it in the scanner, it spins around, you have a 3D file, print it, that's it, at home. So again, you're printing this at home, it's not for sale necessarily. Who's liable? Is there liability? And as some of you may remember from 10, 15 years ago when the music and recording industry went after folks who were doing downloads at home, the whole Napster, Grokster mess. Going after people in their basements is not great for customer relations, right? So it's not good for the content people to do that, kind of chasing around. And yet, what happens if that's where things go? Similar to the patent, we've talked about this a little bit in the high level, but patentability, this is particularly design patents. How do you, first of all, if you're doing, there's so many patent issues that are implicated here, but one of the hardest things is if you, for example, replacement parts. This is an area which is a huge, huge business. We've done a lot of work with the aerospace industry over the years, particularly the aero engine industry. And some of you may know, the business model for General Electric, Rolls-Royce Aerospace, Pratt & Whitney, they don't make money selling these engines. It's the service and the parts afterwards. Right? Caterpillar, it's the same thing. The Caterpillar truck, the gigantic yellow trucks you see on construction sites, their company's income is from the consumable parts that go into those trucks. And on some of the larger trucks, they can burn through $100,000 worth of parts a year. So what if you take the part that you're burning through and print it in the garage? You don't have to go to Caterpillar. It's upending their entire business model. And the general counsel has talked a lot about this. They're very open about this. And they're trying to come up with new models to capture this. The aero engine stuff is an incredible area. It's, of course, highly regulated, which is another story. What is this stuff, right? We talked about this case study I gave you. When you send a CAD file across the border, is it a good? There's no HTS code for CAD files. Does it even fall within what we consider a traded product? Certainly, one could write the HTS in such a way that it could reach some of those things. But it's also, whose good is it? Now, CAD files are highly customized. And what are you, so it's possible if we're moving into a world where you're doing your manufacturing locally, that the only traded good is the raw material, the rubber, the plastic, the resin, the metal. And already we're seeing 3D printing turn into a service. So people are, you can already go to Staples and have things printed. But this whole issue of engineering services and manufacturing used to be, oops, did I turn it off? Oh, there we go. So in the old days, the engineering service of designing and developing products was inseparable from the manufacturing process. But now they're already quite separate. In fact, there are more and more product engineering, product design firms that don't manufacture. And again, this is an area that we deal with every day, semiconductors. The entire US semiconductor industry, almost with the exception of Intel and a couple other exceptions, so much of the US semiconductor industry today has moved to what they call fabless production. Instead of spending billions and billions and billions of dollars to build clean rooms, these incredibly expensive plants, the US semiconductor industry is a design-based industry. The engineering's done here, the design work's done here. The semiconductors are made often abroad. It's very similar. 3D, obviously on a much more sophisticated scale. There are still foundries in the United States, but it's a declining industry. But is it a declining industry? Well, certainly, these kinds of questions are playing themselves out with great drama in our election this year, because people who benefit from this disaggregation, if you will, of the manufacturing process are very different from the folks who are paying for it. Right? If we're not having fabs, if you don't have these engineering jobs, you do have this does upend a lot of the assumptions about, say, a manufacturing company having a joint stake in the outcome, right? So, these are Pirate Bay, and I don't know, have any of you heard of Pirate Bay? Do you know what it is? Pirate Bay is actually an offshore set of servers, I believe somewhere in Scandinavia, Norway, I can't remember exactly, that was infamous for hosting music files and movie files. So people would log on to Pirate Bay and watch videos that were pirated from the movie theaters and so on. There's been an enormous amount of litigation, and who the long arm of whose law can reach them is very unclear. Pirate Bay now hosts hundreds of thousands of 3D CAD files. It's actually one of the hottest new things on Pirate Bay. Copyrighted, trademarked, in some cases patented pieces are up on Pirate Bay. Pirate Bay is a good leading indicator of where this issue is going. And on the left, these are good examples of characters that are clearly protected under various IP law, particularly copyright, that you can make in your basement. So, just moving briefly then on, and I'm sorry, I know I'm running a little over my allotted time here for presenting, but we have a lot of people here who are involved in trade regulation of various flavors. Well, General Agreement of Tariff and Trade, right? It's a product-based, concrete thing trade. Lots of rules on that. Not involved in 3D printing. General Agreement of Trade and Services. What's the service that we're regulating? Essence valuation, right? So the value added of a product is the CAD file, right? All this, in many cases, say that the material you're making it out of is rubber or titanium, some basic metal, some basic raw material, but it's inert essentially until you apply the CAD file. Well, how do you what are you valuing? What's the trade in? So if the trade switches, so if we're no longer importing products, this is going to be less of a concern, I think, for the United States, where we have relatively low tariffs. But for many countries, we still rely on tariffs provide significant revenue, how are you even going to value what's being imported? How do you even know that it's being imported? I mentioned, I mentioned the food issues, but sanitary issues. These are areas that have a lot of regulation when we're talking about the products themselves. You can imagine different ways where the change in the supply chains would, today, for example, we import a tremendous amount of processed food. We import a lot of pharmaceuticals. I think that people knew how much of the, and this is my colleague here will talk more about this, but how much of over-the-counter pharmaceutical products are made out of precursors that are actually from China. I think people will be pretty shocked. The labeling requirements do not require most of that to be disclosed, but there's already tremendous movement in raw materials for pharmaceuticals. In principle, this could be done now. Some of them could be done much more locally. You could customize medicines. You could have doses made for your particular situation. In fact, your doctor might be able to effectively print medicine for you. Why would you buy a dose of acetaminophen that's not appropriate for your body mass and size? Think about that. What you buy is very approximate when we take medication. In fact, I think there was a story in the paper today that, or earlier this week, that 3/4 of parents give their children completely the wrong dose of over-the-counter medicines. This would be the end of that. And so again, technical barriers to trade, what does that mean? If you have a right to send CAD files over the border, the list goes on. I don't need to take you through all of this, but you see where I'm going. How does any of this apply in the 3D world? So I'm not going to run you through this. We just talked about sectors involved. These are like examples of how these are parts. This is medical devices. It's actually very interesting. They're already on bone implants. There are a lot of different, and there's a lot of research being done now in essentially scaffolding organs using your own cells. And a lot of work being done on 3D organ printing. It's an incredible area with a lot of money is being spent. And in principle, over time, it should be possible to print your replacement parts for you. You can see, I think you've all seen, you can all imagine the things that you pay for. $100, I'm sure you've all seen these $100 phone cases at the AT&T store. Well, what if it costs 15 cents for you to make in your basement? Scanning. An example of the original product. Tools, these are just examples. This is the case I told you a little bit about. And one thing that, again, coming back to this case that I mentioned to you earlier, that's in the Federal Circuit, the Invisalign case with the dental molds, enforcement is practically impossible, particularly as you go into the micro level. It's just very, very, very difficult to stop patent infringement, trademark infringement, copyright infringement. How this would be policed is anybody's guess. And the Invisalign case is an example, I think, already of the government throwing up its hands in the first practical application of 3D printing law to existing U.S. IP law. So I won't walk you through all of this. This is some of the enforcement problems you would run into with CAD files under U.S. IP law. So that's my short version of 3D printing and trade law. But I think if you just think ahead and think about all the different things that you touch and the parts that are within the things that you touch, within the next few years, you are going to be able to make, you yourself be able to make much of that in your basement, probably for drastically reduced cost every year, or you'll be able to buy from independent people. Somebody in your neighborhood could have a 3D printer. You could print the hose for your car. You could print the replacement windshield wiper, the lid for your blender that got lost, and it goes on. And what does this mean for the way that companies today decide what to invest in? Will the Rolls Royces of this world, or the GEs, how much will they be able to invest in next generation aero engines if they can't recapture the costs this way? Maybe they need to increase the price of their engines. I'm not suggesting that the producer side should dictate the equities, if you will, but it does mean that the way that everybody thinks about how they make money and how they trade is going to need to be rethought.